Okay, Ruby. So, here in Vermont, this time of year, I got our first snow on the driveway. First snow on the driveway, but it was like so thin we just drove over. So, we've been going over our series, What is the Bible? What's in the Bible? And we're finishing up with Revelation, taking a look at the different views in Revelation. But before I pop that review quiz on you, and I might add one of my students who always does a good job on these pop quizzes, so she might get excluded from the quiz. Well, the rest of you have to take the quiz. You know, that's not partialism. But anyways, so I get this Quora question and answer thingy pops up in my email box. How it got there, I don't know. And they ask many different questions. And I don't know why the guy is considered an expert on everything in the whole world, but so anyways, it entertained the question of why men will sit there looking at another woman while another man is sitting there looking at their woman. And now remember, this site is not theological, so they are approaching it from a humanistic, secular viewpoint. And they put a meme in there. Why settle for a burger when you have steak at home? You guys ever hear that line? Don't settle on a burger when steak's waiting for you at home. So basically what they're saying is the reason men will look at another woman when the woman they have is better is because they're illogical. That was their answer. And I agree with this thinking. I think that's a good way to think. Really, think about it. Is this other woman really better than what you got at home? Really? If you think about it? I mean, in my case, no. Not even getting into the fact that my woman threatens my life, but that's just an additional factor. But the question is, that really doesn't answer the question. Why men do that? It really doesn't. And they can say, well, men, that's just the way men are. That's not an answer. That's just a description. So Christianity has the answer of the sin nature. That the sin nature wants, covets what it shouldn't have. That's just an aspect of our selfishness. So, but sin, in that sense, is actually part of our study, because we're going over in our study how man rebels against God and how God deals with it individually and deals with it globally. One time in the future, God will deal with sin ultimately, finally, globally, and close the book on that. I also want to, in that sense, mention answer-wise, just recognize my friend Dave. He gave a great little spiel last night. We had a gathering together, and he gave a great answer on some things, explaining some things, why we do what we do as Christians. And that goes to that. But we were back, and you're thinking, maybe he forgot the review quiz. My wife will hand out the review papers, and it's all essay. You know, didn't you hate that? At least multiple choice, you know, you could fill in the blank are bad too, but multiple choice, you had a shot at it, but essay, no. Anyways, so we started out going over the partial preterism. Who can give me a synopsis in a sentence or two? What was partial preterism saying?
Jesus already came in 70 AD.
Mm-hmm. And he will come again in the future. So, partial preterism holds to at least 2 returns of Christ. What is the key tenet of dispensational premillennialism? What would you say the key tenet is, the key distinction?
Israel and the church are separate.
Very good. Israel and the church. That's distinct. There's a distinction between Israel and the church. Thus, there must be a rapture where the church is taken out so that God can deal with Israel again. There must be. Therefore, dispensational premillennialism is another multiple returns of Jesus model. And then we were talking about historic premillennialism. And historic premillennialism, my wife expertly asked the question that I didn't give her beforehand of why it's called historic. And it's called historic because the early church started out believing this view. That was their view for the first 200-300 years before they switched to all-millennialism. And historic premillennialism, how many returns of Christ is in historic premillennialism?
Just one.
Just one. Karen, you are now added to the list of good students. Usually Jeff tops the list. We'll see. See how quickly you fall from grace in this class. Yes. Anyways, one return because the rapture happens when?
Before the tribulation?
Before the second coming.
Yes, you are correct, Joe. But it's part of the second coming. So it's like, it's immediately. You know, the church is pulled up. They meet Christ as he comes down. He comes down, he gathers judges, and then starts the millennium. So we were up to going over the strengths and weaknesses of the view. And I told you, I gave you the homework assignment of reading about imminency, the imminent return of Christ, preparing your 25-page essays, and you may hand them in at the end of class. That's an internal joke, because, you know, my classes, they were always like, you should be preparing your 30-page paper in addition to reading 200 pages a week. You know, like, oh, I don't live, I don't sleep, I don't have a job, I can. But anyways, you know, so.
I got a question.
Yeah.
It says new heaven and earth, and it says resurrection of unbelievers. So what does that mean? New heaven, new earth. I know, like, there's supposed to be peace on earth, but what's the new heaven about? Are we going to come back to earth when Jesus rules the earth, or are we going to stay up there and there's going to be a whole bunch of new earthlings that are living in a peaceful earth?
Karen loves it. Oh, no, Jackie loves when I go, yes, no. Yeah, because depends on the view, but almost every view is we don't stay in heaven. We come back with Jesus. Scripture makes that clear. It just depends how many resurrections. I think with dispensationalism, there's like 3 resurrections that happen. So in historic premill, there's the tribulation, there's the rapture and the second coming, there's the millennium, a literal 1,000-year millennium, and then judgment and a new heaven and new earth. So the millennium and new heaven, new earth are not the same in this view. In amillennium, it kind of gets all put together. But the new heaven and new earth, God will make things anew. He will take the earth and make it new. I guess that would hold for the heavens made anew. How can you make heaven new? So, but does that answer the question?
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Yes. So in the new heavens and new earth, we are transformed. We had one seminar, we had a thing, can you sin in heaven? And the guy presented his papers, and then all the smart guys sit there and go back and forth. And I usually don't say anything because they're way above my head. But, both made good points. But I do, in light of contemplating it, think you can sin in heaven, but you won't want to because you're transformed. You will be in the presence of God. And, it's like, use the example, if I was in the presence of Chuck Yeager, I probably wouldn't want to talk to the little private pilot person. I would, but you get the idea. Is this, if a figure is so magnanimous, so awesome, that you're overshadowed like that. And I'm sure, ladies, you can resonate that because the first time you met your future husband, you were so enthralled with his wonderful handsomeness that you just couldn't think of anything else, right?
What?
Moving on. So what is imminency, the imminent return of Christ? Someone tell me what that is.
Absolutely.
What's that?
It's like absolute. It's gonna happen.
Okay.
The definition of eminence is recognition of superiority.
Oh, imminent. Imminent. Okay. Yes. Sometimes there's
dictionary, that's what they tell you.
Yes, sometimes, yes, when I'm flying and I'm allegedly doing my homework, reading, because the computer monitors everything for me, and I have a little dictionary on my iPad to look up these big words that these smart guys use, and there's like 4 meanings, and they're all different.
Yeah.
But that was the case where they have different meanings, but the
That's true.
meaning of imminent return of Christ is
Happening soon?
happening soon. So let's look at Luke 12, 35 through 48 again. Happening soon and happening, there's another word that goes in there. What's that, John? Luke 12, 35 through 48. If you'll look that over, because we're going to talk about this in regards to historic pre-mill. When you look at that passage, verses 35 through 48, what is like the meat of it?
You've got to be ready at all times.
Ready at all times. Why do we have to be ready at all times?
Because Christ can come back at any time.
Okay, that's one thing. Christ could return at any moment. The key phrase, at any moment. Okay? The other part of those passages in regard to Christ returning is, it is,
Absolutely gonna happen.
right, that's what Jeff said. So we're approaching that's already a given, but there's some other quality to it, and it's more human-centered.
Will you always be ready? Will you always be prepared?
Okay, I'm thinking you all were good children. I was thinking when parents go out, my parents would go out to dinner and they said go to bed at 9. And they would always get home like 10 or 11. So being the good child, I'd go to bed immediately at 9. No, I'm watching TV. But I'm thinking they could show up at any minute. So I always had one eye looking out the window, so I see headlights, click, 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 run, jump in bed, right? Because I didn't want to get caught.
With your pants down.
Scared.
Okay, that a visual image you don't want to go home with. Don't want to get caught unexpected, right? So this thing of imminent return of Christ, there's the part of it could happen at any moment, and it's unexpected. And remember, when we went over the verses, we said it could be this or both. Christ could return at any minute, depending on the view, or it's unexpected, because at any minute is ontological. It's a real state of being, whereas unexpected is our perceptions. So one person may be looking and may be ready, and another person ain't looking, and so it would be unexpected to them. So there's two meanings. Wait a minute, iPad emergency. There we go. So we're going to reconcile imminency as far as a historic premill position. Why do we have to reconcile it? Because in historic premill, we said the rapture, second coming, comes at the end of the tribulation. So therefore, in this view, stuff has to happen before Christ's return. So hopefully you get the idea now why you need to reconcile this with the view, because if a whole bunch of bad, global, highly visible stuff has to happen before the rapture happens, can it be unexpected? Right? Like, go back to Hamlet. When Dave and I do the C.S. Lewis series, before we present the conclusion, you're going to expect us to do the series. You're not going to expect us to just start with the conclusion and then give you the essay test. I think we're going to start with the essay, but since it's you and I, Dave, we don't have to take it. Yeah, that's it, because if teachers had to take their own tests. Moving on. Anyway, so Wayne Grudem, who is a historic premillennialist, attempts to reconcile imminency with the signs that precede the return of Christ. Remembering there's a sole return of Christ in this view, because some see the list preceding the second coming that they're so noticeable, like I said, so visible, that Christ's return just couldn't be considered unexpected. So he attempts to reconcile it. So since all these things must happen first, and what are those things that happen first? See, I wrote them down here. Before the return of Christ, there must be a preaching of the gospel to all nations. Mark 13:10, Matthew 24:14. The Great Tribulation is a literal 7-year event. Mark 13:7-8, Matthew 24. False prophets working signs and wonders. I don't think they mean politicians promising lies. That's not what, that was a political joke. I'm sorry deeply if I offend you. Anyways, false prophets working signs and wonders, Mark 13. Signs in the heavens, visible, astronomical signs, stuff going on in the heavens. And Mark 13 again, Matthew 24 again. And the coming of the man of sin and the rebellion with that coming of the man of sin. So, could somebody close the door?
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Anyways,
No, somebody-
and the salvation of Israel. All of Israel. Romans 11:12 and verses 25 to 26. So all these signs are said to precede the return of Christ. So you can see, man, they're so like big and so unnoticeable, not noticeable. You know, you should think, well, if I'm looking for them signs and they all get accomplished, where are you, Lord? It's not like, oh, gee whiz, I wonder what's happening next. You know, like, when your children did something really bad and you got a call from the principal and the teacher, and your kids come home and they're like shocked when you discipline them. Like, what did you think was going to happen? Right? Even though we're inside, we're going, I did the exact same thing. I don't know, did you find it hard as parents to punish your kids when you did the exact same thing? No? Was it only me?
We're not
That
sorry.
was just you.
Just, even though I still had to punish, right? But I'm like, I did this. Anyway, so Grudem, who holds historic premill, feels compelled to find an answer to this problem. How can a historic premillinists hold to the imminent return of Christ after we talked about all that? So, if Grudem is successful in his solution that we're going to go over, then this is not a weakness to the historic premill position. But if Grudem is not successful, then it would be a weakness. This is why I'm going over weaknesses first instead of strengths. If Grudem's solution is successful, imminency is maintained for the historic premill position. If it's not, imminency is lost, and you have to ask yourself, am I going to embrace this view when imminency isn't really true with this view? This is what I said about not contradicting itself or Scripture, having a better explanation. So Grudem, we went over the signs, sorry. Note that many of these signs are said to already have occurred during the first century with the sack of Jerusalem under the preterist view. So preterism could come to Grudem's rescue in part by saying, like the astronomical signs in the heavens, that happened in 70 AD. It wasn't just lightning, there was weird signs in the heavens. And they say because Christ and the angels returned in 70 AD to enact judgment on Israel.
Hey, Ken,
Yeah.
you saying that they saw that in 70 AD?
Yes, they like, I can't remember, it's in the book, there was visible, unusual signs.
Right, but back then they didn't have telescopes or things to explain what we do now, that may have been an atmospheric condition.
Okay, that's possible, right? And if we say, no, that preterism stuff is hokey, then we could explain that away, right? But the same token, since it was for a judgment on Israel and it seemed to be centered on Jerusalem at that moment, the signs appeared above Jerusalem. they would say, hey, they're right here. It's not like they're way off and I just couldn't figure them out. They're right here. I saw these signs. I saw people in heaven. Angels. People.
I'm not saying it couldn't have happened or what they believe, but their perception.
Right.
But they don't have the technology, and there's still some things we don't have the technology for. So our future generations may look back on what we believe as being something from not having the knowledge.
Right. So, yeah, you that would hold for every generation, even future generations, right? But at the same time, there's ways to test our perceptions to see if they're valid.
Well, that's what I mean. How can we discern what happened then? We discern now.
One way is multiple witnesses. When multiple witnesses give the same basic story, not the exact same story, but the same basic story, and they weren't like standing together, talking to each other, that goes to credibility.
So they have some credibility?
Yes,
Okay.
in that view.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to ask Grudem, how do you deal with this aspect that these signs are very visible and very significant, but yet, how are you still going to respect Christ's command for us to be ready? How is that possible? Because, like I said, again, they're so visible, so significant that, you could say, well, obviously Christ is not coming back yet because that sign hasn't happened yet. So we can say from the pulpit, be ready, but we really don't mean it because we know, because we're experts on end times theology, right? And so we're really going, not yet, not yet, not yet. But Grudem has to deal with this. So now add to his problem, we remembered how we discussed, we went over this, how they discussed two meanings of imminency. At any moment and or unexpected. So Grudem's task, what does Grudem do with this? He says, yes, I can resolve this. Certainly I can resolve this. And here's what he says. He says, do you ever note how you wear seatbelts or you buy insurance? How likely do you think you're going to be in a crash or your house is going to blow up? Not likely, right? Really, not likely. But, he says, you're to wear them as if, you're to be ready as if they could happen at any moment and you'll be unexpected, even though it's not likely. So that's a key point here. And let me just draw out where he takes this. He points out how, with major world events like Hitler's rise to power or the large-scale persecution of the church that's going on right now, we could wonder if these signs have already been fulfilled, like the praetor says. Yet, as time passes, we again settle into the idea that they haven't been fulfilled yet. You're going, where is he going with this? Just hang on. It's not like I had to read it 3 times to figure out what he meant. So he's basically proffering, balancing on a teeter-totter, knowing that the signs have yet to be fulfilled as a historic premillennialist, but yet at the same time not certain that they haven't been fulfilled. Thus, one can maintain a sense of unexpectedness and coming at any moment, but yet still insist that there will be a future literal time where these signs will be fulfilled. Did I explain that enough for you to get what he's saying?
It sounds like he's walking the fence.
Very good. He is. And you say, well, gee, Kevin, I have never ever heard of any other thing in theology where they do a little dance. That was an inside joke. Professor Lee, maybe he can resonate with that. Some guys have doctrines and they defend it and they're like doing a little dance show and you're like, what? Sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not. But this is what Grudem says. So I'm leaving this up to you to decide, noting that I didn't necessarily present it fairly. I tried. But you would have to read his stuff to get the straight up presentation to see if it makes sense. I think Grudem would have fared better if he took the approach that I read elsewhere, and so, I can't remember who taught it, sorry, that a person holding the view that Christ will return at the end of the tribulation, that there can still be a sense that his return feels unexpected, and at any moment, because there has been such devastation and climatic events going on in the tribulation that people have just forgotten all the Christian blah, 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 blah about this same Jesus character returning in the air and all that. So you get what I'm saying? Really bad stuff is going to happen in the world, and by the time they get to the end of it, people will have completely forgotten all you fanatical evangelicals things. Jesus is coming back, Jesus is coming back. And maybe like Uthman attempted to do with one version of the Quran, where he tried to destroy all competing copies of the Quran and leave only one copy, his desired copy. Maybe you could say at the end of the tribulation, the powers will try and destroy every Bible, every website, every Christian teaching about how things are going, because they don't want you to know what the end conclusion is. Because right now, when you tell people Jesus is going to come back and there's a final judgment, non-religious people think you're what? Cuckoo, right? You're a nut job. You're that guy. In my growing up, there was always the guy with the disheveled hair. Oh, wait a minute. A guy with the beard, and he didn't wash, and he had to sign, "The end is coming!" And everyone walks by him thinking, kookaloo, kookaloo. No way, things are great. Reaganomics is working. This is a great time. What was I watching? Oh, we watched the show about these people who are combating some other people, and both of them have the ability to go back in time and kill off certain key figures, or like change where the women never get to vote and stuff like that. So they went back to the 80s, and they were wearing 80s glasses. The man had a vest on. Do you remember? Some of you remember back in the 80s when we wore vests and ties and suits? I'm not looking at anybody.
We weren't all nerds. So.
Where did I go with that? I don't know. But anyways, the Christian blah, blah, blah. So...
Yeah, but kind of the non-Christians, that you go through something like that, you're not going to remember the Christian blah, blah, blah. I don't think you're going through a tribulation that bad. I mean, you're just looking at survival.
Yes, but...
Christians, aren't we supposed to hold it in our hearts, even if they destroy all the written word?
Right, but... Yeah, that's a good point. I never even thought of that. Under historic premill, the Christians are still here. Yeah. So, we would still be saying, look, you idiots! It's happening like we said, like Bible said. What's a Bible? That thing they all burned up. But I memorized it. You memorized the Bible? Shoot him. Anybody else memorize the Bible? You know, and that actually was a story. Who actually paid attention in literary class? Was there a story where they banned books and people would memorize a book, and to read the book you'd sit down and talk to the guy? Do you remember what that story was?
Brave New World.
I don't know about Brave New World. I don't think I ever read it. But you were close.
The Book of Eli.
The Book of Eli, that movie. I like that movie, even though, yeah, I never.
1984.
No, you're the closest, Jackie. Fahrenheit 451. And it wasn't about burning the Bible, but it was all books. And then the movie came out. The book was better. But the point is, if we're still here during the tribulation, don't you think we're going to be screaming our heads off about, what's happening, especially since all the signs are starting to be fulfilled? Like, come on! So yeah, and now you led to a good point, and my point is that think back when Hitler was rising in the 30s. Could you say the coming of World War II was unexpected? You could, but really, didn't most people know something big was going to have to happen because of what he was doing and Japan was doing? In the same way, I think it's hard to say that you can hold to imminency when all the signs, massive signs, are yet to be fulfilled. All right, so another solution to the imminency problem, one that doesn't fare well for historic premillennialism, is to build upon something that I told you that wasn't quite accurate. Well, it is, but it isn't, and I'm going to explain that maybe. I'm talking about a possible solution is to hold that there are two returns. Do you see how the multiple returns does have some explanatory power? Because if the rapture precedes all those signs, and then there's another return, you could say, oh, well, this return doesn't need any signs, but this one does. So that could be a solution to this problem. But again, it would conflict with historic premill's thing that there's only one return. Since I told you that the idea that there's multiple returns really didn't show up in church history until the 1800s, I came across some other things. Kinda. And I emphasize the word kinda. Francis Gumerlock and Justin Tillman say that there was some things. For example, Gumerlock, at first in his paper, he dispels the popular evangelical idea that Darby got this idea about two returns from a young girl who had visions and something, and she got these visions from God. Have you ever heard that as how Darby got it? Because it does run around in evangelical. He says, no, that's not true. He also says the idea that there's multiple returns of Christ was in the Bible, but somehow it got removed. He says that's not true either. I guess some people who try to defend multiple returns of Christ, by saying, well, it was in the Bible, but they pulled it out. Instead, Gumerlock details how there's at least two pre-trib rapture ideas in the 11th and 14th centuries. However, they don't really match Darby's pre-trib things. That's why I kept saying kinda. There's kind of the idea of two returns, but they're not the same as Darby's. For example, one guy in the 11th century was saying how there's going to be worldwide fire. Fire so big that it goes to the top of mountains, and the Christians are going to be pulled out only high enough to clear the fire. You see, that's not what Darby was teaching. In the other one, it's a little closer. Yes, there's going to be a rapture, but it doesn't happen until halfway through the tribulation. That's not what Darby teaches. So, and then Justin Tillman, he looked to an Eastern theologian. When I mean Eastern, the Eastern Church, which is Eastern Orthodox. Anyways, there's a theologian that taught a pre-tribulation like rapture, but Tillman says basically in the end there's enough ambiguity in what he taught where you really can't consider it a pre-trib rapture. So what I'm basically saying is, yes, there was some things, and Gumerlock gave a seminar and basically said that. Yes, there was very few things of a multiple return of Christ in church history before Darby. However, they were very vague. So you would have to balance, you have to balance that. Any questions on all that? That looked so clear and concise when I wrote it on my notes, and now I feel like I muddled it. How do you feel about Grudemann's solution, that he feels that absolutely these signs have to happen yet before the end of the tribulation, before the rapture happens, but at the same time, I'm faithful to the doctrine of imminency? Do you feel he was successful?
No, I still feel like walking on the fence.
Tiptoeing on the fence, right?
Yeah.
Real.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that way too. When we get to post-trib, they also have to deal with this. Some say in post-trib, they say it's the generation of imminency where that generation won't be expecting it. It's not where it's what you now. What?
What's the definition of generation to that respect?
Because, Jackie, you bad person, this came up in dispensational. In dispensational premill, some Bill Shea, a dispensationalist, teaches that the generation from when Israel was formed again as a nation, 1948, that generation is what's allocated, and then the end comes. So, and he goes by Jesus saying, this generation will not pass away. So in dispensationalism, when Israel came back a nation, 1948, you go one generation, and the end of the world has to happen by then.
But what definition of nation?
I'm getting there. Okay, tell me, what is the number of years in Bible that equals a generation?
100 and... No. 90...
40.
40. Where do you get that?
About the Exodus and the Hebrew children.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay, but they say no, it's 70 years. I forget where they get 70. The Bible tends to define a generation as 40 years. Once in a while, more or less. But let's go with 70 years. Let's give them the benefit of that. 1948 plus 70 years. When in the future will that date happen?
2020, it's now.
It's up, it's already down.
We're here.
Uh-oh.
2023.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. And I'm not trying to mock. I'm really not trying to mock. But what I'm meaning is, what do you do when facts don't agree with your view?
Our
What do you
years.
do?
Well, the year, what we call a year versus a year in the Bible as well. I mean.
A year in the
5 years.
Bible is 360 days. The Jewish year, so like we said, the tribulation is 7 Jewish years, not 7 Greek Gentile years. However, I said, the Jewish does have a leap year or something to compensate.
It'll have to be a big leap year.
So I heard this idea back when I was in my teens, and it made sense back then, because all I ever got taught was one end times view, and I never knew there was more than one times. And oh yeah, 70 years. Oh boy. I don't want Jesus to come back before that because I want to get married. Literally, that's what I thought. I don't want Jesus to come back because I wanted to get married. Yes.
Now?
Not now. I meant back when I was a teenager.
You remember that.
Did you hear the thing? Jesus, come, Jesus. A student in a seminary. Oh, Lee's not here. Every test. Oh, Jesus, are you coming back in the morning, please? And the night before his wedding, Jesus, please don't come back. You know, understandable, right? So, that would be a weakness for the historic premill view. Unless you think he's successful, you would have to say there's a weakness. We will continue, and the next week we will cover the thing of the rapture superfluous, because I always call it superfluous, but the rapture is superfluous. We're going to start with there on the history. Any ending comments, questions? I hope you're still engaged in this. I hope this still is interesting to you. I find it fascinating, interesting. I don't like arguing. Sometimes I run into people and they want to argue about this. I'm not a good arguer. I don't like arguing. There was a joke there, but I'll just leave that go because I don't want her to kill me. Anyways, thank you, Father. Lord, I want to say thank you that you're going to bring judgment, that the world doesn't get to run on its own forever, that there's a reckoning that's coming. But Lord, it makes me tremble. It makes me tremble, Lord. Just like I never enjoyed punishing my kids, and I believe my mother's words that this is going to hurt you more than it's going to hurt me. No, wait a minute. It's going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you. And I laughed at her, but I found out that was true. Lord, I'm not thrilled that people are going to suffer judgment. Oh, Lord, what's wrong with their heads? Thank you, Lord, that you still speak and you still offer salvation. You still offer forgiveness. You have not tossed us away. Oh, what a great thing that is, Lord.